Senior political analyst Brit Hume joins us. Good evening, Brit.
Hi, Shannon.
Okay, so let's talk trade and tariffs. The president says today, after the ripples and the backlash that came last week, both domestically and internationally, he says we are not backing down. But we understand a final announcement, a final decision is yet to come. Where do you think he goes?
Well, my guess is that he will go through with the ones that the tariffs that he's announced. He may soften the effect on some of our allies, as President George W. Bush did. But I think these tariffs on steel and aluminum are going to happen. The question then really becomes whether they in themselves will cause as much havoc as some are predicting. I very much doubt that. The worry is about what happens after that, whether in fact the retaliation meets with retaliation again from him, and pretty soon we have a trade war. There isn't anybody that I know of that thinks a trade war is a good idea, and despite the president's comments about trade wars being easy to win, they usually end up as being a loser for everybody involved. And my guess is that the president will pull back from that, and that this may all be another example of the president, blustering talk and threats and so on, and it ends up being less than meets the eye, but we'll see.
Yeah, and he said he's not even sure there will be any kind of trade war based on his announcement that we expect within the next few days. Meanwhile, we heard from Democrats. I talked to several of them last week who were actually very supportive and happy about this idea. Most of them in that Rust Belt area that's been hit really hard with a number of blows to the steel industry. And when we talked about worries from the agricultural community, from farmers, from other industries within the U.S., they said, you know what, it's time for the steel industry to get a break, and we can't worry about everybody else if we're going to save these towns and these mills. But it's certainly setting up some very interesting showdowns.
Well, remember this, Shannon, about steel. Steel has been a troubled industry in the United States for about as long as I can remember. There are serious disadvantages, competitive disadvantages that steel has with other countries around the world where they can produce the stuff much cheaper. And they, too, have big industries that create that product, and they got to do something with them. And that creates the situation of glut, which we now have, which is affecting the U.S. steel industry. It is a strategic metal. There's no doubt about that. You have to have the capacity to get steel when you need it if there's an international conflict of some kind. But this has been tried before. As John Roberts noted earlier, President Bush tried this with steel, and he ended up lifting them after a while because the retaliation was strong and it didn't really work. I'm dubious as to whether it will work this time, but remember this about this president, Shannon. This is something he basically promised to do during the campaign. And say what you will about Donald Trump, he does try to keep his campaign promises, and I think in this case he's trying to redeem another one. How far he wants to go with it, obviously, is what we're all watching.
Well, and Sarah Sanders said repeatedly, and again today, that no one on the Hill, and there's been plenty of pushback from the Republicans, should have been surprised because, as you said, he's been talking about this issue and making these promises for years. Last week, one of the Senate's top Republicans, John Cornyn, said that they were going to have hearings on the tariff issue because we want to exercise our important role of oversight of the executive branch. Today, the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, also pushing back, saying we may need to flex some of our muscle when it comes to this issue and limits on the president's power. How do you think that all shakes out?
Well, this is a case where the president is at loggerheads with the conservatives and the Republican Party, which is to say most of the Republican Party. Republicans have not been in favor of anything but free trade, wide open trade for a very long time. There are a few exceptions to this, but not very many. And the president now finds himself, in company with a certain number of Democrats from Rust Belt states who are obviously trying to protect their local communities and their local industries. But I don't think his support is very wide on this, and obviously if certain American industries start to get hit on this, it will evaporate pretty quickly.
All right, Brit Hume, always great to chat with you. Thank you.